All right, happy Monday once again. So we'll get started. Um, Lucas is out, so I'll dive into his items. Um, Refinement responsibilities, implementation plan versus a requirements list. Do folks have an opinion on what you're trying to go? What are you actually trying to do as a part of refinement?
I think I was the one that brought up this question that he had here, and I think where I landed was I've been using writing down an implementation plan as a way to like flush out the requirements, so to speak. Like, okay, well, oh, this is just a part of the process of thinking through and make it a little bit more concrete. But it might be nice to make it concrete that it'll likely change and that's acceptable and not like the final and has to be. It's an example, right? It's like here's one way we could approach it, and this is what my weight was based off of. This, thinking about it critically in these ways, brought up these other questions that then we were able to have the time to work through, because that's a lengthy time process. A lot of times that back and forth of trying to figure out where are we going to go with solving the issue, and waiting until we've actually committed to it doesn't mean it's necessarily ready to be in dev. So I think it's kind of where we landed, but we could also just document the hard requirements and weight them. I think that would be appropriate too. So I'm open to iterating on this. I've some of the cards or issues, excuse me, that I've been assigned over the time has been pretty loose, and so I've been trying to make them a little bit more concrete in the refinement so that we have less back and forth once we actually commit to a thing. So that's my background, or my point of view, at least. What do you all think?
Yeah, I agree with Daniel. So for now, I'm just focusing on implementation plan, especially finding out the places where we need to touch, because the requirements may not be clear at the beginning. So with this implementation plan, the requirement becomes more concrete over time. But yeah, at the beginning, it is not the final version of the requirement placed. So maybe the way we are doing this is good for now, I think.
Let me ask a follow-up question for you both, since y'all are not as tenured as some. Is writing an implementation plan a reflection of unfamiliarity with, or a lack of tenure with the project or projects that we're working on? Or is that your preferred way of working even as you become more experienced and exposed within the various projects we're working within?
I, for one, appreciate and enjoy coming to an issue that has a solid implementation plan. Sometimes those get really stale, though, and so it's like you start going through it and you realize, oh, things have changed since then, and so that can be tough. But it's really nice when you get to something you're like, all right, a lot of the upfront thinking's been done. I can just get into it and like really solve the problem and move forward, rather than, I mean, it's kind of like the getting things done approach, right? Like, do your critical thinking and planning ahead of time so that you have clear, actionable work when you're ready to actually do the work. So that's just that, but I think that can definitely be a personality and, you know, a preference thing. So I'm fine going with other approaches, but that is my preference.
Okay.
The only thing I would encourage y'all, and I think this issue is actually a great example of it, is I don't necessarily care how this particular issue gets done, and y'all propose various ideas and then discuss them. I think for me, what would be helpful is as we do this, making sure that there's like a summary comment where we sort of summarize whatever the threads are. I mean, even this issue, as simple as it is already kind of hard to follow with the way that our comments work. So I like the diverge, consider, argue, etc. But then, like, if you've got something, like if you've got this issue loaded into your brain, you've got the context on it. So like set an overview of like a proposed recommendation moving forward. And I think that'll help us really sort of keep issues moving.
So you mentioned summary comment. That's kind of what I've been doing with the description, and that's kind of how I see it too, is like, all right, this is the most current state of reality as we see it going forward. Yeah, and I think that's really important to like try to wrap it all up together, but like having it, do you want a comment or do you mean like in the description?
No,
I would do both.
absolutely love updating the description. Just when you do the description, like it's not super clear that you've updated anything. So like, hey, I have proposed a new path forward and updated the description.
Right,
That
yeah.
captures all the conversation above.
Right. Oh, okay. Okay, so you add a new comment. Generally, when I'm doing a thread, I wrap the thread up. Say, okay, this is where we're at with it. This is where I'm going with it. This is what I put in the description. Would you say it'd be good to also have another comment at the bottom saying I've addressed all the threads, or do you think that's sufficient?
I think everything depends, and it depends on the
Okay.
number of open threads.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that
if there's
makes
like
sense.
20 different open threads that you summarize, then maybe one at the bottom is good. But yeah.
On some of the hairiest ones where it's like there are 7 open questions, I've created like a comment thread just to track the closure of the other threads. I'm really looking forward to the feature where we can mark a thread as resolved in issues. That would be just a killer feature. You know, we could probably have a pattern though where we react with the check mark emoji on threads, right? On the initial thread, kind of like
I've
we
been
do with
trying
Slack.
to do that. I think also
Cool.
when you ask multiple questions, splitting those questions into separate comments also helps. I know you're doing the like A and B, which is also very helpful.
Yeah, I like that.
So I have a related question here. So related to refinement responsibility. So whenever we create an issue, so when should we split the issue into multiple smaller issues? Like an issue may be very big. Maybe it has a 13 point weight. Yeah, it may consist of a lot of things to change. So should we put everything in the same issue? Because the benefit of that is that we can track the issue. We don't need to jump into other issues for history or the changes to be made, and we can use the check marks inside that particular issue and see which part is done, which part is not done. So yeah, like when should we divide into multiple smaller issues, or we should keep it as big as it possible?
I think it depends upon how big it is and how many things it touches. But I think generally the smaller the better, but like I'm going to use a term that I haven't heard here yet, but keeping it as a vertical feature slice, right? Like, so what I mean by that is generally we want to organize our work in such a way that it delivers a value all the way through. It's not going to be, hey, do the database migrations and then do like this code and then do this and like split things horizontally. But you know, each issue by itself has some form of value all the way to the end, you know, and accomplishes a whole cycle, even if it's just say in our case like one analyzer. But sometimes we have issues that touch many analyzers, and if it's a small thing across many analyzers, maybe it's a lower overhead to only have one issue. But if it's like pretty big across multiples, then maybe it makes sense to chunk it and split it apart, because then we could have flexibility about how many we commit to each release. So I think it depends upon how big it is and how soon it is to actually working on too, right? There's that idea of adaptive planning, and as something's further out in the future, it doesn't make a lot of sense to split it up really small, but then as you get closer to the time where it works on it, making it more actionable and smaller also makes sense to me. But that's a lot of my history and how I've worked on past teams. So I would assume that we would work maybe a little bit differently, but those are my thoughts.
So the
What do
rule
you
of
think?
thumb may be something like this. Issue means one feature. That issue may contain multiple MRs, but all the MRs are related to that particular feature implementation. So yeah, we can practice that. Like I think we have already practiced that. So everything related to the feature, starting from documentation, code change, maybe database migration, writing other scripts, everything should be related to only one issue, and we can create multiple MRs, right? That is how. What do you
Yeah,
think? Okay.
I think the only nuance comes into how much of a feature you do, right? Because a lot of times there's multiple things that can be done, and sometimes when you're there's a balance there to be struck too with like how long you work on something versus getting feedback and iterating. So sometimes you can realize, oh, well, we could go half a way to this full feature, get feedback, get meaningful insight into it, and it's still useful, you know. And sometimes we can slice things in that way and say, well, we'll do this second part of it in another issue, and that doesn't actually degrade the value that it actually does. I'm trying to think of a good concrete example, but what do you think of that? Like, for example, like the script, I think is a great example. Like maybe a script, if it's a hard requirement for this feature to be useful, yeah, then that probably needs to be a part of that issue. But if that just makes things easier and there's a workaround, maybe you ship first and then have a follow-on issue to make it easier in the future if it's proving useful and people are using the feature. So I think sometimes you can split things, but certain things like documentation and tests, they should always kind of be included in a thought. Like, well, if this thing requires. But it looks like Thomas, you have some thoughts.
I have opinions.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going to risk voicing them at the expense of possibly squashing conversation. And I love the conversation. My opinion is that if we are splitting an issue, we are naturally talking about affecting the scope of what we are delivering. If you think that you need to split an issue, that is a clear signal to start talking with Taylor.
Okay.
I don't think you're good. You will have I predict that you will have a willing participant in that conversation. But as far as to entertaining what the conversation is, my recommendation is that if your intuition is telling you what is being written here. Yeah, so hopefully you enjoy talking to Taylor. But my recommendation is that if your intuition is telling you that you've got more than a week's worth of heads down work, let's start talking about splitting the issue apart. The reason why I'm suggesting that is that our cycle time for going through the MR process, particularly as we get into Rails, is long. That's another week's worth of work on top of that. Secondarily, the longer that this goes, the more change is going to be that you're going to be exposed to, because whether it's MR reviews or community contributions or other issues for consideration, or it just exposes your surface area. So if you think that you're going to be heads down on an issue for longer than a week, let's start talking about splitting it up, would be my recommendation.
Just for reference, is that 5 a way to 5? Is that what our reference is right now?
If you think you're above that, yeah, let's start talking about splitting this up into implementation issues.
Cool.
Ideally, a vertical split rather than a horizontal split, though I completely appreciate as engineers, it's easier to split issues horizontally because those are discrete areas of changes. Which leads me to, since I'm looking at the clock, we spent 18 minutes talking about this. Item number 2 here, we do have a static analysis section of the handbook. Why do I bring that up? Because that offers an override as to how we choose to work from a process standpoint. I would very much, in the scope of who approves those changes are the folks that are in this call. We have control over how we operate as an override as to how the stage is choosing to operate, which is an override as to how the company is choosing to operate. I would very much appreciate someone putting forward an MR to document this conversation there. And then that way we can have a conversation on something that is discoverable and we can point to as to how we're choosing to, as far as guidance goes. Everybody did what I was afraid. They got quiet.
I am super stoked about this handbook page.
Yeah, and I went minimal on intentionally, by the way.
Yeah, I love that. I was going to add a bookmark. Maybe what we could do is we could have a race to create that MR. I don't know how quick I'll get to it, but I would be happy to do it.
I saw Sakat nodding up and down, so I think that's who you're competing against.
Hooray. I'll race you, Sakat. How's that sound?
Yeah. So I'll be blunt where I think the line of demarcation is as far as what's safe for us to do internally versus what is not safe. Our current delivery workflow is based off of these workflow labels. They have meaning. If we're suggesting we're changing the meaning of what those labels say as far as what work we are doing within them, we need to have a broader conversation. How we realize the work within those states, that we have control over. So. I can type. All right. Anything else before we move on? All right. Y'all ready to talk community contributions? Okay. As noted from last week, we got a lot of them, or at least enough of where we're getting, and they're going to increase, particularly as SAST begins to go to core. And especially since we've had one that was a year and a half old that I closed out with the blessings of the contributor. We need to start making capacity available for this. So I've got an experiment that I want to try in 13.1, and it's a role that I think many of you have heard me pontificate about in the past, a community manager. Basically, you have three priorities. Number one, community contributions. Those MRs and those issues, triage them and help move them forward, and hopefully either to some form of closure, whether that is acceptance or we're not going to accept this because we need to go this other direction from this other issue. Excuse me. Priority one, bugs, because those are bursty and that we're not going to be able to plan for those. And then if you don't have them, dealer's choice. What's bugging you? What do you want to change? What do you want to fix? What's in our backlog that's just you compelling you to go try to figure out and solve? I mean, you pick what you work on. And the idea being is that this responsibility for community manager, you do it for an iteration. And then we'll rotate it to the next person, and to the next person, to the next person. If this is deemed to be an experiment, that is something we want to continue forward. But it provides you with the slack time to go be experimental. What do you think?
I really like it. I think it's a great idea.
All right. Do I have a volunteer?
But would the switch be like on the 22nd kind of thing? We'd go 22nd to 22nd.
When 13.0 ships, you flip.
Got it.
That's when it goes.
Cool.
For whoever does this first, you get the bonus of the first release of analyzers going to core.
What do you mean, the bonus?
The bonus work of, like, if Brakeman is first, you get to push it down and make it available on core.
Oh, okay. Cool.
That would be the exception for the early on. As we're releasing new stuff down into core, that's what you would start with. So I'll add that to the list.
It's community related. So the idea is like making this more available.
Yeah.
So you'd have 4 responsibilities. Gotcha. And that would be a higher priority than triaging the community contributions. Are P1 bugs
so.
really 3rd in the list, do you think?
I think,
I guess, go ahead.
I think so. And the reason that I think so is that P1 bugs have an SLA of 30 days, whereas community contribution URs have an SLO of 48 hours for response.
That makes sense.
So
also, worst case, you can pull other folks onto P1 bugs if they're a big enough deal. So, cool.
Do we have the concept of like P0 bugs? I mean, 30 days seems like a long time to me, but.
This release is what it's trying to assert, so that if you catch one on day 1 of a given release, you have that release cycle to get it out the door, is the intention. We're not great at these.
The
mostly
P1
because
bugs?
at achieving the SLA for P1 bugs.
Yeah.
And
well,
that's my fault.
Yeah, and I suppose if you treat it as a 30-day window and you don't start working on it immediately, it makes it really hard to hit the window.
Yeah.
Because it's not really like the window is the next release.
Yeah.
Like that's what it's trying to go for, right?
Yeah, that's what it's trying to go for. That's why you see we have SLAs for P1, P2, P3, P4 in the 30, 60, 90, and 120 days. Now, actually, I think P4 is hoping that they've taken the SLA off, because we typically put them in the backlog and won't deal with them until they're reported the 2nd or 3rd time. But it's to me, P1s are intrusive and they're hard, especially in a push-based workflow, because I'm filling your plates and I got to figure out what we're going to take off. So this reserves capacity to deal with them, because we don't know when they're going to arrive or who's going to deal with it.
Yeah, I wonder what the Kanban or, automotive like workflow pull, like what is that? What is a P1 bug in that? Is that like, sorry, that's way off in the weeds, but is this an interesting thought? Because it's not so much I'm ready for capacity, it's you must deal with this now. It's interesting.
You have a broken part that you're supposed to put on the something going down the assembly line.
Okay.
That would be the factory equivalent, I would assert.
Yep, that's priority 1.
Yeah. Stop the line. Got to fix this. Anyway, this is an MR coming from me this week to document what this is, by the way. So it's not in the handbook yet. I am looking for a volunteer, so if you're interested, let me know. All right, looking at the clock. Quarterly career framework reviews, they're all scheduled. So if you need to move it, please let me know. Yes, they will take an hour, by the way. And Taylor, you got a bunch.
Okay, so I wanted to make sure that we got the secret detection question from earlier today answered. Are we good with that?
Yeah, I think that's answered.
Okay, I will update the release post to mention a future deprecation about this, but I think we'll be good from where I see this at this point.
Okay.
Okay. Big thing happening this week, next week are the transitioning of these auto DevOps and secure CI templates. Auto DevOps is currently scheduled for 5/13. You'll see that release task there. We have our own release task, but of course Lucas is out this week. Those two things need to ship together. This is probably my biggest focus, is to make sure this goes right. There's already been a lot of confusion around this issue, which I'm handling upstream. But I just want to make sure that like someone's watching this while Lucas is out, and we've got a plan for timing and making sure all of this stays coordinated. Okay, I will chat with Thomas about that offline. Also, if you saw lots of notifications over the weekend, there was a lot of stuff moving around. We now have epics attached to SAST, secrets, and malware for all of our maturity statuses. SAST is the one that I'd encourage you to spend the most time looking at. Don't panic. There is a lot of scope in all of these, and in fact, a lot of them are still blank as well. Basically, I tried to take a pass through our entire backlog, all of our planning boards, and tried to associate anything that we have today with our upcoming future milestones. I'll then be building out all of the issues related to the net new functionality. So know that that's there. Feel free to take a look at those. Also, I'm going to work on an update to the direction page that sort of encompasses all of the stuff that's in there and all of the things that we've been talking about and breaking down for the to complete. So know that's coming. And it'll be a place for us that we can point community contributors to if they're doing things that don't align with the direction that we want to go. So there's that. We've got another community contribution that is going a way that I don't know is the way that we want to go. So I wanted to discuss that and see where or if we need to step in and say, hey, this isn't aligned with where we want to go. And then the last thing that I'll point out is there are lots of release posts related to our stuff. I've tagged lots of people over the weekend in these. Feel free to take a look at them, propose suggested changes. But this is currently all I'm tracking in terms of what I'm planning to include in the release posts for 13.0. So lots of things, lots of links. Feel free to look at them, ping me, ask questions, update here.
On the vendor template merges, Remy has said they're ready to go and that we'll have them merged in by Wednesday. And was just asking if I'm good with the timing, so I've given him the thumbs up. So I think that's on glide path to land. So yay. All right, I'll go to number 10, which I think is the last one that we've got for time for. Okay, relative sizing for bugs. Good idea or rank smell of process overhead? And yes, I wrote that. I was feeling punchy when I did so. This is an honest question. I would very much appreciate the discussion. I will go ahead and state what my opinion is. If it's something we're scheduling in a future release, we should know its size or have an opinion of its size.
So this is whether or not we add weight to bugs?
Yeah.
Ross, were you going to speak? Or I think I heard someone else start to speak.
Oh, yeah. Just so usually we don't assign any weight to bug. Like I just got it from another culture. Like I don't know, here we should do that or for bug fixes. Usually whenever you implement a feature, you assign weight to a feature, but for bug, I'm not sure.
My opinion is no, but that's me and my past, because I think there are a number of things. One, by the time you figure out what the weight should be, you've solved it generally. So that's number one, and so then it really just puts a bunch of the weight and the responsibility in the refinement process. The second thing, just that bugs should have a cost, and so necessarily your velocity, et cetera, and all that will dip or volatility if you're dealing with a lot of bugs, and that then puts a lot of weight on let's not ship bugs. But I think the hardest part is they're really hard. Bugs are really hard to do that. So it would add a lot of overhead, and yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay. It's a planning concern, and capacity concern. That's why I'm asking the question. I'm amenable to it. I just want to make sure I've got it documented what the process is for going through bugs and getting them fixed.
Let me ask you this. I mean, that philosophy that I was basically espousing to also puts bugs above features. So if you have bugs, you should work them first. That's not always possible. So I wonder if having some form of a bug budget or something along those lines could help with planning of like, if we, always slate so many, in terms of that. I don't know. I guess you're talking about relative sizing, but
Yeah.
it's just really weak in terms of estimation.
Okay. I'm fine with it. It can skip an estimation step.
I mean, an alternate could be to just put a weight of 5 or whatever on every bug across the board, and then retrofit a weight once we work on it or something like that. Because I agree with Daniel, like fixing a bug, like figuring out what the problem is most of the bug work, and you need to do that to know how much work it is, and it's cart and horse problem, I feel like.
I'm fine. Y'all are arguing against me, and I'm not going to hold my position strongly. My position has been, if we're going to the step of scheduling it in a future release, we should have an idea of its size, and that calls for pointing bugs. And so,
yeah, that is hard, because by scheduling a release, you're saying it's at least a 13 or less, or what is a full release weight?
yeah.
Yeah, that is hard. And sometimes maybe you'll encounter one that's bigger.
Yeah. Well, the thing is about it. So when we look at bugs, so we've got P1, P2, P3, and P4. Those are where the SLAs are against. So P1, they're going to interrupt a current release. And so the SLAs for those others are calling for, we're going to schedule it for the next release, or 2 releases out, or 3 releases out, as far as when we need to have it realized. That calls for, how big is it? That calls for a little bit of a triage work in advance. So that's where that's the logical connection that I made. I am not one to hold strongly to that. I just need to make sure I know how to allocate capacity for bugs, which means that I need to do some more investigation on what's our discovery rate, which I don't have internalized. Anyway, I wanted the conversation. It's come up a few times. We're 6 minutes over. Anybody have anything else they want to talk about, or defer? Or can we defer till next week? Silence means thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of your Monday.